Rooftop housing has been an integral part of Hong Kong's history for the past 60 or so years. Our project documents this unique housing form through the use of interior and exterior photographs, architectural drawings, and text records of the residents' stories. But before we take you to Hong Kong, we want to do a quick detour to Beijing and Germany to show you our previous projects to understand how we got to collaborate on this Hong Kong project. So in 2006, I was very fortunate to be able to go study in Beijing for 1 year. And at the time of my study, approximately 1/3 of Beijing's 12 million population comprised of rural migrants from the smaller towns of China. And there's no public housing program in place in China. So I really wanted to find out where do all the migrants live within the city. And so I spent a year trying to find out more about migrant housing, and one very prevalent form is underground migrant hostels that are converted from bomb shelters. And they're all over the city, but if you ask people in the city, they probably don't even know. They wouldn't be able to tell me where they are, or where I can find them, and whether they exist. But when I walked through the city, they're everywhere. So the study area that I chose was directly adjacent to the central business district. So Remku House's CCTV project is only a few minutes walk away from this particular underground hostel. So to find out more about it, I actually rented a bed in this hostel, like room B is where I rented for 2 months, and to get to know the people and document the lifestyle in these places. That was my bed. That's my bed on that side. And so often these places are rented out by different types of businesses as employee housing. And so I spent a year photographing and recording these people's stories. Sorry.
Is it my turn? Hello. So the project I worked on before we teamed up Portraits from Above was about Bauwagen. And I have to explain this because there's no English word for Bauwagen. Bauwagen in Germany are trailers that were originally built to house workers on building sites. And the end of the 1980s, out of the squatter scene, squatting houses became very difficult because the squats would be evicted immediately. So people started doing something else. They would use these trailers and also buses and trucks, live in them and occupy disused urban plots of land with these trailers. And this is still going on all over Germany. Practically every larger German city has at least one of these Bauwagen sites, one of these trailer sites. And of course, now and then there's great controversy. The local governments want to get rid of them, but the sites have a lot of supporters. And in 2002, in Hamburg, where I come from, one of these Bauwagen sites was evicted, and there were a lot of protests, and it was in all the media. Everyone knew about it, everyone was talking about it, and I realized I hear about Bauwagen all the time, but I actually have no idea what one of these trailers looks like from the inside or from the outside. I'd never seen one. So maybe that's a good starting point for a photo series. And I went there with my camera and discovered these amazing interiors. So people would really put a lot of work into their trailers and shape them exactly as they wanted them to be. Some of them would be very elaborate, and some of them would be, like a jumble. But whoever was living there would still say, "This is exactly how I want to be, how I want it to be, how I want to live." So the interiors were very, very varied,
reflecting the fact that the people living there
come from all walks of life. Some are students, some still go to school, and others work in all kinds of jobs. So I photographed these things, and I used to test these images with my friends and just hold up a print and ask, what do you think this is? And they'd say, well, maybe it's a boat, maybe it's an old workshop, or the other one might be, I don't know, a shed or something, you know, out of America from the 70s, alternative living. And then I'd say, no, it's Bauwagen. And they said, wow, that can't be true. You know, it was just that one word that made the connection, the theme that everyone knew about, but, you know, what did it look like? So, and then later on, of course, I became interested in showing them from the outside, and again, you can see how people modify the trailers using old window frames from buildings, adding second stories, sometimes chopping off the roof and turning it into something that looks like a proper house, but it's on two wheels. And then I'd also start looking at how they would interact or not interact with the city proper. So this is one in Berlin, and you can see the new city approaching this Bauwagen site. I became interested in sort of urbanist discussions and themes, and got to know these two American people, Brett Bloom and Ava Bromberg, and they were working on a research project. They originally wanted to turn this into a publication as well, and they were using this website, Unhoused, to gather material. Wherever people would lose their homes or couldn't afford to live properly or didn't want to live in a proper house, wanted to, you know, do it themselves, this would be interesting to them, and they just gathered the material on this website. So they posted the Bauwagen stuff, and a few months later, I looked at the website again and discovered the Beijing Underground project by Rufina. And there was a bit of text explaining what this was about, and at the end, there was a sentence, in Hong Kong, it seems to be the other way around. Migrants don't live in cellars, they apparently live in tin huts on the roofs of buildings. And I thought, this sounds like a story, and so I wrote her an email and asked her whether we wouldn't want to team up on this. Do I have to go on?
So at first we started to do some research. Of course, I was born in Hong Kong, and my parents lived there all their lives, and I asked them about rooftop housing in Hong Kong, and people from my parents' generation all know about rooftop huts, but none of them could really say for sure whether we would find any more back in 2007. And my friends, the younger generation, wouldn't even know about rooftop housing. But everyone that I talked to warned me, saying that these places are filled with criminals and they're all very dangerous and don't ever go there. So we were a bit uncertain whether we would find anything in Hong Kong.
We tried to research this thing from outside of Hong Kong, which was very difficult. Again, we couldn't find any images. You know, this sounded like something, but we couldn't find any photos where one would see this. We did find a few government documents online, and the most interesting one was a survey carried out by the Fire Services Department of Hong Kong in 1998, and they had looked. This was not a census. They had actually looked at every building in Hong Kong, and they found informal rooftop structures, rooftop homes, on top of 9,000 buildings in Hong Kong. So these might be smaller buildings or larger buildings, but if you do the maths, a lot of people would be living up on the roofs. Then again, there were other documents online. Of course, then now and again, the government would decide we're going to get rid of 2,000 rooftop homes next year, and then we're going to clear so many roofs the next year. So it was clear this was a massive phenomenon, but we didn't really know would there be anything left when we got there. The best lead we had was we got into contact with Jonathan Lai, who's a journalist with a Mingpao Hong Kong daily newspaper, and he actually said he was the first guy to say, yes, I can take you to one rooftop. I conducted some interviews up there some years ago. I can show you where it is, and it's still there, and I can take you there. So that's actually that building. That was the first one we visited. It's quite a large block. It looks like 3 buildings rolled into one. It was put up in 1959. It has 8 stories, so we count the building stories, the formal ones and the informal ones. So this has 8 plus 3. There are 3 stories of huts on top of the 8 formal floors of this building. So this is another view of this building. You can see its height, and you can see down to the street. And there are 6 staircases, and one door or the other would always be open. And the staircases lead right up to the roof, so we'd just walk up. But actually, down near the entrance, you could already see what would be going on upstairs. You had these the rows of letterboxes for the regular flats, and then to the left of that you had all these letterboxes for people living up on the roof. So we walked up the stairs and right up onto the roof and landed in this maze of corridors. Basically this would be open space, but a lot of it was covered, so it was a mix. It was somewhere in between a corridor or a village path, and it was very complex, so we got lost immediately. Well, in the end, all we could do was, knock on a door. So this is actually the way we worked through all of the project. Jonathan, the journalist who brought us there, he didn't actually know anyone anymore. He had conducted interviews, but the people whom he had talked to had gone, so we just had to knock on the door. And surprisingly enough, a lot of people opened the door and asked us inside, and we explained our project, and they said, okay, you can photograph our homes, and you can measure and draw, and as long as you don't take a picture of me, that's okay. And then later on we'd return with our equipment and actually do that. The first unit we want to show you, you don't really have to go inside though.
So at the top of one of these staircases, someone's kitchen is kind of nestled into the top landing of the stair. So this person's been living on this rooftop for more than 30 years. And his unit is probably one of the most ingenious uses of space that we've seen. This pathway that you see, depending on whether he's home or not, would be a regular corridor when that door is closed, or when he's home, he opens it up and that space transforms into his living, dining, kitchen area. And during horse racing days, like, he could sit here and chat about horses with his neighbor down the corridor. So a big part of my role in the project is to document these homes. And so first we would go there, and Stefan would be taking photographs while I do measured drawings and trying to figure out how these spaces work. And so through a series of drawings and sketches, I try to figure out what would be the best way to communicate the spatial qualities of each of these huts, and to arrive at a very analytical type of drawing that allows you to see the staircase that comes up, and his kitchen, his bathroom to the north, and then his bedroom that is to the south. So these photographs kind of show you a view of this hut. And that staircase that you see leads up to someone else's flat above this one.
The photograph, of course, sort of gives you a feel of the place, and you can see a lot of detail and the belongings of this person, but you would never be able to understand how his flat actually works. That thing on the right there is his bedroom, and this is the corridor, and where the chair is standing there, you can just about see his kitchen. Now, the way he uses that space, you can only understand if you look at the drawing, and then you can compare the drawing to the photograph, because there would always be detail in the drawing that you could find in the photograph. So if you really get into it, you could actually figure out where the camera was standing if you're looking at the drawing.
So I think rooftop communities are very much what Bernard Rudofsky would call architecture without architects. And this image really explains the physical infrastructure that allows rooftop communities to exist. Hong Kong is a subtropical climate, so unlike building in Canada, a lot of the building services don't need to be insulated, and they're often just found on the exterior wall of the building. So one can imagine these pipes quite easily be extended to serve the subsequent layers of construction afterwards. So in this photograph, you can see the incremental growth that happened throughout the past 60 years, different types of materials all stacked on top of each other. So it really was a three-dimensional puzzle that I have to figure out, and we would go on to neighboring buildings to look across and do more drawings and take more photographs to try and understand how each of the units fit together to create this village. So on top of this particular building, there are about 30 to 40 huts, and that range from 1 story to 3 stories high. And so from plans, I would be able to build a model, a three-dimensional model of this rooftop village. So upon construction completion in 1959, that would be the beginning of the building of a rooftop village. So this is the clean slate, and then this is the subsequent layers. And this is a kind of before and after drawing of what we saw when we went there in 2008.
Yeah, and this is a photograph of that building again, and it looks picturesque. If you'd only have this picture, you could look at the colors and the way the metal has rusted and faded. But from what Rufina told you just now, you already begin to get a sense of that these, how this place works, how it has grown, and that this is a form of architecture, and there are actually people living there, and soon we'll go inside and actually meet people. So we'll return to this building later on because it was one of the most interesting rooftops. But we didn't only want to show one building, we wanted to show a range of buildings and to give a sense of the scope of this phenomenon. So we walked through, how do you find these rooftop settlements? There's no map. They're not, you can't look in a telephone book. So we walked through many parts of Hong Kong and looking up, and whenever there's a slanted roof, you can be quite sure that it's a later addition to the building because normally the roofs are flat in Hong Kong. And we found these rooftop structures, unauthorized rooftop structures, I think is the official name? Or?
The government would know them as unauthorized building works.
Oh, okay. So we found them everywhere. We found them in the older parts, on the smaller buildings. We found them on quite new buildings. We went up buildings that were 40 stories high, and there'd still be a hut on the roof. But we soon figured out that with the higher buildings, in the better areas, it would usually be the case that someone living in a flat in the building would use the roof to either as storage or to extend his living space. And that wasn't really the kind of story we were interested in. We wanted to find people who didn't have anywhere else to go, who were living in these huts and dependent on this kind of housing. So we concentrated on areas that were designated by the Urban Renewal Authority of Hong Kong as areas to go redevelopment. And these 9 areas, we looked at them, and in the end we worked on 5 buildings in 3 of these areas. And first of all, we're going to take a look at a building in Guntank district. This used to be a factory area. This building, I think, was also built in 1959. It was at that time quite a remote area, but of course since then the underground has been built, and what was once remote is now quite central, so it becomes interesting for developers. Also, a lot of the buildings there were apparently built with saltwater concrete. Probably the developer just wanted to save money and use salt water to mix with the concrete, so they're in bad shape and crumbling. Take all this together, and this turns Guntank into the largest redevelopment project the Hong Kong government has ever undertaken. And very soon, the whole of old Guntank, which was built in the 50s and 60s, will be gone. What we found was very interesting, in several ways interesting. The top floor of this building, this is 8 stories high, I forget.
Yes.
It's 8 plus 1, and the top floor used to be a cage home. And the owner of the cage home, he lives in the huts on the roof. So he came to Hong Kong as a refugee, which is, of course, a very typical story. Hong Kong is a classical refugee city. Every political upheaval on the mainland would send loads of refugees to Hong Kong, and there was always too little space to accommodate all these people. So he came at the end of the 40s, fleeing from the Chinese Civil War, and 10 years later, at the end of the 50s, he decided to set up a cage home business together with 3 friends. What it is, this used to be quite typical of Hong Kong also. There used to be a range of accommodations for people who couldn't afford good housing. So you used to have squatter villages on the hills of Kowloon. They looked like, something in Rio de Janeiro. They've all gone. You had these cage homes, which there are not very many left of. Basically, you'd rent one, not a room, but just one bed in a 3-tier bunk bed. And to have a bit of privacy, you'd cover the side with wire mesh, so it would look like a cage. That's why it's called a cage home. And by 1962, when a lot of people were fleeing from the famine in China, that was the heyday of this cage home. There would be more than 200 people living in the space of what should have been sort of 6 normal flats.
So from this drawing, you can see the relationship between the cage home units on the top floor and its relationship to the rooftop huts above. In this case, not only the owner of the cage home lives on top, but it is also a communal space for the cage home tenants below. There is a communal kitchen where everybody, so on the top of the staircase would be this open area where the people would gather for meals and get a breath of fresh air. And there's also a communal kitchen where each person will have their own kind of cooking box with their utensils and pots and pans in there. And so they would cook their meals together and eat it on the rooftop as well. The wife of the cage home owner, who's still living in her rooftop hut, speaks very fondly of the rooftop space as once a very vibrant and lively gathering space for people.
So now we move to another area, Samsoi-po district, and to the other end of the scale of rooftop living. This was also the highest building we worked on, 12 stories plus one. And there's this building code in Hong Kong that says if a building has more than 8 floors, you need an elevator. Anything up to 8 floors, you just walk up. If you have more than 11 floors, you need an elevator. And then the buildings with an elevator have a different character. They have a lobby. You have an elevator, you have a lobby, and you have a caretaker sitting there. So most of the time it's quite difficult to get inside. Not with this one. The caretaker there didn't care. So we just walked up. And yeah.
So on top of this 12-story building, we found 2 households. And for us, these were relatively speaking, the most luxurious rooftop homes that we visited. So the first one that we visited, the unit comprised of 3 distinct areas. The outdoor space, one half of the unit is for living, that's where all the bedrooms and bathrooms were. And then the other half of the unit was completely devoted to mahjong, recreation. So this rooftop could fit 6 of these automatic mahjong tables, so you could have a group of 24 people gambling on this rooftop hut at any one time. And the outdoor space is generous enough for laundry, storage, growing plants, or even a game of basketball, right?
So the cage home setup was sort of one example of informal economies evolving around rooftop housing. There are many more. Often, we'd meet people and they'd say, oh, an acquaintance of mine, he left this place and so I moved in, or places would be passed on between relatives. And you can even now in Hong Kong, you can walk into a regular property agent and rent a rooftop space, or even buy one. There are people who have, contracts saying, I bought this hut on the roof. Of course, if the roof is evicted, it's not worth anything, but anyway, they paid money for it and they pay rent. And this family living here, his father worked for the developer when the developer put up this building in 1965, and in return he was given this rooftop space to live on. So his son and his wife, they've been living there forever, and they raised their family there, and their kids are now grown up and live elsewhere. And in order to not feel alone, they decided to rent out some rooms to new immigrants arriving in Hong Kong. So 4 of their 5 bedrooms have been transformed into spaces to rent out, and they have individual electricity meters, and then they share a living room and a bathroom. So another example of what goes on up there in terms of buying, selling, renting, and all that. What comes now?
So moving from the more luxurious rooftop homes, so from this 13-story high building, we can see in the neighborhood below there are many different types of rooftop huts. On the other end of the spectrum is this unit located on Building 2, which is also in Samsoi-po district in the Kowloon Peninsula. This is an exterior shot of this home. You can see the tarps that are kind of covering the hut that is on the top of this exterior staircase. Inside is quite messy, and when we met the couple who lives here, the wife told me that she has no idea how to even begin cleaning the unit. And her husband is a longtime Hong Kong resident, but herself was a recent immigrant to Hong Kong from mainland China. And she cries every time it rains because everything in the hut gets wet except for the bedroom space. So this hut basically operates like a hut within another hut. So when we met them, they were applying for public housing. And in order to be eligible for public housing, one has to be a Hong Kong citizen, and that takes 7 years. And then there's an average wait time of 2 to 3 years until you would be given the opportunity to move into a public housing flat. So we're talking about a span of 10 years when a newcomer to Hong Kong would have to find affordable housing for themselves within the city. And so they were very excited and they can't wait to move because they were finally allocated a housing unit that is in an urban area. So quite often when you're given a chance to move into public housing, it would be located in very remote areas. And just the pure transportation cost would make it impossible for these people to go to and from work every day. So this is another view of the bedroom hut within the outer shell.
And actually, they didn't want us to photograph inside the bedroom. They considered that sort of their personal space. And Rufina had a look inside and saw some family photographs, and it was clean. The bed was in there. It was okay for us to photograph around, on the outside, but not inside. And what they told us that it wouldn't make sense for them. Of course, they would very much like to have a nice flat, but it just wouldn't make sense for them to be far away. And that's a story we heard many times. So this is, of course, one important reason why this rooftop housing continues to exist. These people work. I mean, they come to Hong Kong to work. They don't come to Hong Kong to make a holiday, to hang out. They come to work. And they often work, of course, in not well-paid jobs, in a restaurant or, I don't know, cleaning up the garbage and stuff like that. And they need to live close to where they work. Otherwise, they can't afford to travel to where they work. So we want to return to building number 5, as we called it in the book, because this was really, it was the most complex and the most vibrant settlement, rooftop settlement we found. There must be about 35 households on there, and we went into, how many? 12, 13?
Yeah.
Something like that. This was a nice place. Also, this is a typical Hong Kong family story. He came from near Shanghai to work in Hong Kong as a chef, and his wife and daughter still live in Shanghai, so he's near Shanghai. So he's in Hong Kong for 10 months during the year, and for 2 months he goes home. And in the meantime, they sort of keep in touch by internet connection, and he has a webcam. And first when he came to Hong Kong, he lived in the regular flat, but a so-called partition flat. So too many people to one flat, partitioned off into small spaces. And he reckoned he had a tiny room. It cost him 2,000 Hong Kong dollars. It only had a very small window. So when he found this rooftop hut, it was a step up. This place only costs $600 Hong Kong dollars, and it has a lot of light and it has good air circulation, so it suited him very well. And also, it gave him a chance to decorate it the way he wanted. So he chose all the colors, the greens and the blues, and painted the place himself. So an interesting feature of this hut is also it has a mezzanine. So if you climb up that ladder, you get to the mezzanine. He uses it mostly as storage, but when his wife and daughter come to visit him in Hong Kong, his daughter loves to stay up there. So, and from the outside, this thing would look like all the other homes. It would just be a tin hut, a rusty tin hut. But you could never be sure what you would find inside. What would that person's story be? What would that home be like? And quite often it would be, you know, quite functional and convenient for someone living there. Shall I? So this is another unit on that roof, and this one, you could already tell there was something up there when you were looking at the letterboxes down in the hallway, because there was one letterbox which said Pakistan Penthouse. So, and this was the Pakistan Penthouse. We met a young fellow there. He was 21 and he studied statistics in Islamabad. And so he lives in this tin hut, and I will never forget this, and he speaks 6 languages. I unfortunately only speak 2, but he speaks 6 languages. Let's see, Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, Arabic, Cantonese, and English. So he was one of the few people whom I could actually talk to, because I don't speak Cantonese or Mandarin. I could only speak to the Pakistanis. And he said he's only in Hong Kong for a certain period of time. He works as a construction worker, and he says even in that job I can earn a lot more money than at home. And when I've been here for a few years and saved enough money, I'll just go back and start my own business in Islamabad.
So in speaking with, so the Pakistani penthouse is actually 2 rooftop units, and if you go there on the weekend, all the doors would be open and there would be blasting music and movies, and there would be a gathering of friends in that one area on the rooftop. Another resident in one of these 2 units told me a very interesting story. He himself is a 2nd-generation immigrant to Hong Kong, so he speaks fluent Cantonese. He was born and raised in Hong Kong, and he was actually offered a public housing unit, but subsequently rejected it because when he went to visit the unit, he realized that it was so small that he couldn't even perform his daily prayers within the space that was allocated for him. So he decided to keep living on a rooftop.
Yeah, so this settlement was really interesting, but this is the house next door. And obviously, you know, the same thing had been going on there, but it's already been evicted. You can still tell this was someone's bathroom and kitchen, but everything's gone. You can just, it's like the plan is left, but the homes have gone. So sometimes just the roofs are evicted. As I said at the beginning, the fire service department in 1998, they found rooftop homes on 9,000 buildings, and half of these they said were a fire hazard, because half of these buildings would be very small. They'd only have 1 staircase, and if a building has only 1 staircase, the roof is considered an escape route in case of fire. So they targeted those 4,500 buildings to be cleared first, and sometimes they evict the larger roofs as well. But that's not. We think that's not what's getting rid of most of these settlements. Actually, the biggest problem is that the whole building disappears from under them. So the land is very valuable. Hong Kong is a very small area, and areas that used to be remote are now central because of the underground. And for a developer, of course, it makes sense to invest in buying all the people out of the regular flats and then tearing down the building and building something which is much higher. Why should you only have 10 floors if you can have 70? Like, for instance, Langham Place in the background. In this picture, you can see the new city closing in on our building number 5.
So since the completion of this project, we found out that 3 of the 5 buildings that we documented have either been torn down or they've been evicted in preparation for demolition.
So, of course, rooftop living is very specific to Hong Kong, but this mechanism of redeveloping old areas of a city, but for whom? You know, for people who want to go and live there. Mostly it's not done for the people already living there. They have to go somewhere else. Like the rooftop residents, where do they go? Do they go to the new territories, which is too far away? Who knows? So this mechanism, of course, is the same all over the world. Thank you.